Friedrich Nietzsche is well known for his proclamation that God is dead. But can an immortal idea ever truly perish? Or does it merely change form, recreating itself anew in every epoch or cultural milieu? Dionysus, Nietzsche's favorite mythological figure, is undoubtedly one that can be reborn, just as Christ is also believed to have risen from the dead. This is, however, not the real crux of the issue. What is implicit in Nietzsche's conception of Dionysus is the problem of whether or not religion and mythology can also undergo a rebirth, and that resurrection itself can be a form of eternal recurrence. It is well known that most of the early writings of the German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, revolve around a prognosis of duality concerning the two Hellenic deities Apollo and Dionysus. What is less known, however, is the complex relationship Nietzsche creates between mythology, religion, and culture. To fully understand how this impacts on his theories of culture, society, and politics, it is imperative first to understand his views on religion and mythology. All of the elements of Nietzsche's philosophy need to be examined in conjunction to visualize the complete picture. When considered in isolation, they appear contradictory to some readers. The Apollo and Dionysus pairing first appears in The Birth of Tragedy. It is subsequently modified by Nietzsche in his later works, and the characteristics of the god Apollo are reflected and absorbed by his polar opposite, Dionysus. This transition begins in The Birth of Tragedy, in which Nietzsche first establishes this theory of two different forces entwined in human nature as the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Though this topic has been examined frequently by philosophers, it has not been examined sufficiently in terms of its relation to the Greek myths which pertain to the two gods in question. Religion, for Nietzsche, has both its beginning and end in Hellenic mythology. Unsurprisingly, the Hellenic tradition was one of Nietzsche's areas of academic focus. His interest in this area of research is also illustrated in his exploration of the use of mythology as a tool by which to shape culture. Nietzsche's first major work, The Birth of Tragedy, draws heavily from Greek myth and literature, and also contains much of the groundwork upon which he would develop his later premises. Setting the tone at the very beginning of The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche writes,
"We shall have gained much for the science of aesthetics, once we perceive not merely by logical inference, but with the immediate certainty of vision, that the continuous development of art is bound up with the Apollonian and Dionysian duality, just as procreation depends on the duality of the sexes, involving perpetual strife with only periodically intervening reconciliations. The terms Dionysian and Apollonian we borrow from the Greeks, who disclose to the discerning mind the profound mysteries of their view of art, not, to be sure, in concepts, but in the intensely clear figures of their gods. Through Apollo and Dionysus, the two art deities of the Greeks, we come to recognize that in the Greek world, there existed a tremendous opposition."
Several of Nietzsche's ideas are built upon this initial foundation, and ultimately derived from a Hellenic perspective. However, this was not a unique concept, and Nietzsche's ideas did not develop in isolation. These concepts evolved from earlier, pre-existing sources, which were very much in vogue within the German academic circles of his era. Greek history was a prestigious area of research, referred to collectively as Germanic Philhellenism, which was a form of cultural revival in which Germans looked back to ancient Greece for sources of inspiration to invigorate their contemporary culture. Altertumswissenschaft was also a popular academic discipline in Germany, because it was not overtly political along the lines of nation and religion, and was able to provide a utopian intertwining of Germany and Greece. At the time, ancient Greece was revered as the pinnacle of European culture, and by emulating certain aspects, many academics sought to invigorate contemporary Germanic culture. Vasilis Lambropoulos writes that these new educated Germans saw themselves as the modern Greeks, the inheritors of ancient culture. As a consequence of this Hellenic revival, many theories began to emerge, which were not inherently religious, but did draw strong parallels between Hellenic tradition, religion, and civilization. This era of Germanic Philhellenism began with the works of J. Winckelmann, who claimed that the path to Germanic greatness lay in imitating the ancients, the Greeks in particular, and the generation of German thinkers reconstitutes its image of German identity and its possibilities. Winckelmann's depiction of Hellenic Greece, therefore, was not only an academic work but also a cultural one, providing a powerful counterimage to the political and cultural particularism of the German states in the earlier 19th century and beyond. In contrast to Nietzsche, Winckelmann's New Germanic Greece was based on a sedate, peaceful, and classical society. This view retained dominance in academic circles until it was challenged by the release of Friedrich Kreuzer's symbolism and mythology of the ancients, especially the Greeks. This book portrayed a very different depiction of ancient Greece, that uncovered a hidden history of bloody sacrifices, intoxicating orgies, primitive hunting rites, and other liturgies that burst asunder Winckelmann's dreams. Kreutzer described a fundamental opposition in Hellenic tradition between the later Olympian gods of Homer and the earlier chthonic deities connected to the earth and the underworld. As a contrast to Winckelmann's Apollo, the dark god Dionysus was born into Germanic philosophy, becoming the demiurge who was the creation of the material world and became intertwined with its suffering. Kreutzer also inspired Johann Jacob Bachofen to write essay on the symbolism of ancient tombs, the Mother Rite, and the Saga of Tanaquil. Bachofen reworked Kreutzer's idea and established an opposition between earth-based, feminine forces, and masculine, sky-based forces, which is in an obvious parallel to Kreutzer's original paradigm of chthonic and Olympian deities. Before the composition of The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche had encountered the works of both Bachofen and Kreutzer. Despite reading Kreutzer, however, Nietzsche only mentioned him once, during his early Basel lectures. Bachofen's influence on Nietzsche is excruciatingly apparent. The opposition Bachofen cites between Apollo and Demeter is analogous with Nietzsche's own Apollo/Dionysus pairing. Changing Demeter to Dionysus was a deliberate correction on Nietzsche's part, because Hellenic imagery from Delphi depicts Apollo and Dionysus as being worshipped in tandem. Thus, for Nietzsche, Bachofen's opposition of the sun/sky/male to lunar/earth/female erects a false dichotomy. The Uranic/chthonic pairing was more complex, and it occurred between two male gods connected with the processes of higher cognition and creative vitality. Moreover, Nietzsche's own preference is for the darker, chthonic component of the dyad Dionysus, which is considered to be inferior to the Uranic model espoused by Bachofen. Bachofen associated Dionysus with virile male sexuality connected to the earth, and thus with the first, Tellurian, and the second, which Bachofen designates as matriarchal, stages of existence because he believes Dionysus is connected to Demeter. Whilst Dionysus is associated with the earth and fertility, he is also associated with the arts, the sun, and death. Demeter is more closely associated with agriculture and the earth, while Dionysus' symbolism is more abstract and complex. Demeter is also more appropriately designated to fertile earth, telluric, while Dionysus represents the aspect below the earth and ground, chthonic. Although both refer to the earth, one refers to the tangible firmament of the soil, the other to an intangible domain located beneath the earth. Gender dyad that equates to masculine versus feminine gender preferences. Moreover, there are broader issues involved with ascribing male and female sexuality to the two gods. Firstly, if gods existed, they would be beyond human form. Thus it is extremely reductionist to attempt to inscribe mortal biology onto a supernatural entity who does not even possess a corporeal form. Secondly, there is a human tendency to seek patterns in nature, which are, in fact, not present. This need to fabricate connections and correspondences leads to reductionism, faulty reasoning, and flawed logic. To reduce gods, nature, and civilization down to a rigid polarity based on human sexuality is not only absurdly anthropocentric, it also deprives nature of its inherent complexity, reducing concepts to an extraordinarily simplistic black and white or binary view of the world. By correcting these perceived imperfections, Nietzsche came to be the most well-known representative of this lineage of German Philhellenism, having surpassed and excelled both his predecessors Winckelmann and Bachofen, for as Max Bohmer remarks,
The tradition of Dionysus and the Dionysian in German literature from Hamann and Herder to Nietzsche, as it has been set forth for the first time from aesthetic manifestos, from literary works, and from what today are obscure works of natural philosophy and mythology, bears eloquent witness to the natural mystical and ecstatic stance of German romanticists which reached its final culmination in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche.
It was Nietzsche who fully established the tension and dialectic between Dionysus Zagreus of the wild dithyrambos, full of labyrinths, and the god of light Phoebus Apollo, the disciplined, well-ordered paean. This is laid out in The Birth of Tragedy, where Nietzsche directs his critique against Hellenic classicism and Winckelmann's dream of Apollonian purity by recreating a different vision of ancient Greece, one that is archaic, rather than classical. The repercussions of this would later be echoed by Walter F. Otto, Martin Heidegger, Alfred Bibler, Weimar Republic thinkers, and many others. In addition to being inspired by the Greeks, Nietzsche was also profoundly influenced by Schopenhauer. It is only by examining Schopenhauer that the intricate nature of Nietzsche's will to power, and the relationship to Dionysus can be fully understood. Schopenhauer believed that dealing with death was the first, and most essential, the function of any authentic religious tradition. The Dionysian element present in Nietzsche's writing is partially a response to the Schopenhauerian philosophy of redemption. According to Schopenhauer, both Judaism and Greco-Roman paganism were failed religions because they lacked a properly developed doctrine of immortality. Nietzsche sought to solve the issue by proving that Hellenic tradition did provide this belief, for Dionysus, like Christ, is a dying god. He dies, but is reborn through sacrifice. Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation also exerted an enormous influence on Nietzsche, but Nietzsche believes the will is positive, and he associated it with the Dionysian element. Dionysus is used as a symbol for both will and representation, which, according to Sokol, is where Dionysus symbolizes the unconscious, and the will to power manifests as dynamic energy in eternal flux and change, the Heraclitean panta rhei. The will, therefore, is a fathomless reservoir of vital primordial power. Since Dionysus is chthonic, Nietzsche also believes the will is likewise located below the surface of the mind, and is therefore associated with the subconscious. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche openly acknowledges the power inherent within the subconscious.
Only now do we discover the truth that the greatest part of our intellectual activity lies in the unconscious. The unconscious becomes a source of wisdom and knowledge that can reach into the fundamental aspects of human existence, while the intellect is held to be an abstracting and falsifying mechanism that is directed, not toward truth but toward mastery and possession.
Nietzsche also makes other alterations to the earlier Apollo/Dionysus dyad, and Apollo gradually appears to fade into insignificance altogether, and his figure appears to have been superseded by Dionysus. Despite Apollo's conspicuous absence, he is still present since any apparent opposition betwixt them is illusory, with the pairing echoing a mutual symbiosis, or even a relationship based on commensalism. Thus, Apollo is still present encapsulated within Nietzsche's transposition of Dionysus. What begins as a dichotomy in The Birth of Tragedy transforms into a synthesis in Nietzsche's later works, with the name Dionysus being used to refer to the unified aspect of both Apollo and Dionysus, in what Nietzsche perceives to be their ultimate manifestation. This union is, according to Nietzsche, symbolized in art, and especially in Greek tragedy. Greek tragedy portrays the union of the Apollonian and Dionysian, a union in which Dionysian passion and dithyrambic madness merge with Apollonian measure and lucidity, and original chaos and pessimism are overcome in a tragic attitude that is affirmative and heroic. What Nietzsche describes is the syncretism of Apollo and Dionysus in equal quantity, wherein the two art drives must unfold their powers in a strict proportion, according to the law of eternal justice. To derive ultimate mastery of the creative process, one must harness both the impulses represented by Apollo and Dionysus, the instinctual urge and raw creative power of Dionysus, coupled with the potent skill of Apollo's craftsmanship, or, more precisely, the subconscious creative power of the will coupled with learned abilities. This infers that, for Nietzsche, at least, art is a manifestation of the will to power, or the art of becoming. This concept of the artist as a creator, and of the creative process portrayed as a manifestation of the will, is a core component of Nietzsche's thought. It is the artist, the creator, who diligently scribes the new value tables. Nietzsche, therefore, announces a new form of artist who prefers to diligently craft human society by philosophizing, shaping the world with a sculptor's hammer. This artist is also referred to as the Übermensch by Nietzsche. It is the Übermensch, the artist as a leader, that demonstrates the unification and perfection of the Dionysian, and the Apollonian as the manifestation of the will.